Dad's been gone 5 years. 5 years of just Mom and me, Sarah and Liam, against the world. We had our rough patches, sure, but we were a team. College was tough, money was tighter, but we leaned on each other. Then Victor came along, and everything tilted on its axis. He's younger than Mom, which already felt weird. 35. He's got that practiced charm, the kind that makes me instantly distrustful. Always a little too polite, always smiling a little too brightly. He says all the right things, but it feels hollow, like he's reading from a script. Mom seems happy, or at least she wants to be. That's why I've kept my mouth shut. I'm in grad school now, living at home to save money. I pull my weight, working part-time, covering bills and groceries. It's temporary, but it makes sense. At least I thought it did. Victor, though, he wants me gone. He doesn't say it outright, but it's in the little digs, the subtle jabs. It must be nice having a safety net, Liam. Or every bird has to leave the nest eventually, son. Son. I grit my teeth every time he calls me that. At first, I ignored it. Chalked it up to him trying to assert himself. But then the little things started. My food disappearing from the fridge, even though it was clearly labeled. Laundry I left in the dryer ending up dumped on my bed, while his and Mom's were neatly folded. I even found my shoes crammed in the back of the closet once, hidden behind his polished dress shoes. It's not like I can yell about missing yogurt or a wrinkled shirt, right? But it's a message, loud and clear. You don't belong here. The tension in the house is thick enough to cut with a knife. Mom pretends not to notice, or maybe she's just choosing to ignore it. I can see the strain on her face, the way she avoids looking at me when Victor makes one of his jokes. I hate this. I hate the way he's wormed his way into our lives, into my home. I hate the way Mom is acting, like she's walking on eggshells. I hate the feeling that I'm being slowly erased, piece by piece. This is my home. My father and I made this place. But soon I would discover that this was just the beginning. The family dinner was a minefield. Mom invited some relatives over, and Victor, of course, played the perfect host. Pouring wine, telling stories, basking in the attention. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, gauging my reaction. Everything was going smoothly, deceptively so, until Aunt Carol asked about my future plans. Before I could even open my mouth, Victor jumped in, his smile a little too wide. Well, Liam's an adult now. At some point, grown children need to know their place. This house belongs to his mother and me now. The table went silent. You could hear a pin drop. I looked at Mom, pleading with my eyes. Say something. Defend me. But she just gave me that tired look, the one that said, don't make a scene. Rage simmered inside me, hot and bitter. I forced a smile, the kind that felt like cracking glass. Oh, and what exactly is my place, Victor? Since I pay bills here, and I've lived here longer than you have? He did that fake laugh thing, like I was joking. Just saying, Liam. You need to respect the man of the house. The air crackled with tension. This was it, the line in the sand. Then he dropped the bomb. I think 6 months is a fair timeline for him to find a place of his own. He said it like he was announcing policy, like he had the right. I stared at him, my blood running cold. 6 months? Who did he think he was? I looked at Mom again, desperate for her support. Nothing. Just an awkward sip of her wine, her eyes darting away from mine. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice flat and hard. If my mom wants me out, she can say it herself. Victor's face darkened. He didn't like that. Not one bit. He'd expected me to back down, to be polite and agreeable. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. The dinner dissolved into strained conversation and forced smiles. I could feel Victor's anger radiating across the table, and Mom's silent plea for me to just let it go. That night, I lay in bed, my mind racing. 6 months. He really thought he could just dictate my life like that? The gall of the man. I knew then that things were going to escalate. The gloves were off. This wasn't just about a missing yogurt anymore. This was a power struggle. and Victor had just declared war. After the dinner party, the little things intensified. It was like Victor was testing me, pushing my buttons to see how far he could go. My stuff was accidentally misplaced more often. My framed photo of Dad and me vanished from my desk. My textbooks ended up stacked in a corner of the garage, covered in dust. My name was mysteriously left off a dinner reservation. When Mom and Victor went out with friends, I started feeling like a ghost in my own home. My presence was being deliberately erased, slowly but surely. I'd catch Victor watching me, a smug look on his face, like he was enjoying my discomfort. One evening, I overheard him on the phone, talking to someone in a hushed voice. "Still working on making the house a home. It's a process, you know?" He paused. "Yes, he'll be gone soon enough. Just a matter of time." Rage boiled inside me. I wanted to burst into the room and confront him, but I held back. I knew he wanted me to lose my cool, to give him an excuse to play the victim. The breaking point came when I found my favorite blanket missing. It was a soft, worn-out thing, the one my grandmother had knitted for me when I was a kid. It was more than just a blanket. It was a piece of my history, a reminder of happier times. I searched the house, frantic. Finally, I found it crammed into a donation box in the garage, along with a few other of my belongings. A book my grandmother gave me and a small statue my father carved. That was it. He wasn't just being annoying. He was deliberately trying to erase me from the house. I stormed into the living room, where Victor was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Where's my stuff?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. He didn't even look up. "Decluttering," he said casually. "Must have accidentally donated some things." Mom, who was reading in the armchair, finally looked up, her face creased with worry. "Victor, that's not okay." He laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of irritation in his eyes. He didn't like her questioning him. I didn't argue. I just turned and walked out of the house. I needed to get away, to calm down before I did something I regretted. I drove to the nearest donation center, my heart pounding with fury. I searched through the bins, ignoring the strange looks from the volunteers. And there it was, my blanket, still folded neatly, like it had just been placed there. I grabbed it, along with the other items, and drove back home. I marched straight past Victor, who was now standing in the hallway, trying to look innocent. "Oh, you got your things back," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "That's great. I didn't mean to upset you. I didn't say a word. I just put everything back where it belonged and walked into the kitchen." I looked him straight in the eye. "If you touch my stuff again," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "I'll start going through yours." The smug look vanished from his face. He ran to Mom, of course, all teary-eyed, claiming I was threatening him. She just sighed and told him to stop. "Just stop it, Victor. Please." He turned it around, saying he was the victim, that he was just trying to make things work, and I was bullying him. I didn't care anymore. That was the moment I decided he wasn't pushing me out. I was leaving on my terms. But on my own terms, it meant planning. Victor was too cocky, he thinks he's won. I'll show him. The next phase of Victor's little campaign was bizarre. I found a sheet of paper taped to my bedroom door. It was titled House Rules. Not normal household stuff, like wash your dishes or take out the trash. This was a full-on roommate agreement, like I was renting a room from him. No overnight guest without prior approval. Any visitors must be cleared in advance. Personal belongings should be kept in your designated space only. I stared at the list, my jaw tightening. This was beyond ridiculous. This was an attempt to control every aspect of my life, to turn me into a stranger in my own home. I looked at Mom, who was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I held up the paper. She barely glanced at it before saying, "Victor's just trying to establish some structure, Liam. Should I make my own list of rules for him?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That got her attention. Her face tightened. "That's not necessary, Liam. Just try to be understanding. Victor stood in the kitchen, acting like he wasn't listening, but I could see the smug satisfaction in his eyes. I crumpled up the paper and tossed it in the trash. I wasn't going to play his game. The next day, I invited my best friend, Noah, over for a study session. Nothing crazy, just notes, coffee, and an attempt to survive grad school. Half an hour in, Victor appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, his face a mask of disapproval. "Why didn't you ask before inviting someone over?" he demanded, his voice sharp. I looked at Mom, who was at the dining table, pretending to read something. "No help there." "This is still my home, Victor," I said, my voice tight. "I don't need your permission to have a friend over." He made a big show of sighing, like I was making things difficult. Then he turned to Mom. "Sarah, do you seriously think this is okay?" She hesitated, probably weighing whether it was worth the argument. Finally, she muttered, "Liam, you should be more considerate." Victor acted like he'd won a major victory. Later, when I asked Mom why Victor got to make rules for me, but I couldn't make rules for him, she just sighed and said, "He's just trying to make the house feel like home, Liam." "For who?" I asked, my voice rising. "Certainly not for me." She didn't answer. I hated this. The little digs, the sly comments, the way she wouldn't defend me. I knew I needed to leave. A couple of weeks later, we had another family gathering. My aunt, Mom's older sister, asked how things were at home. Before I could answer, Victor jumped in with a fake laugh. "Liam's still living with us," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, acting like a little kid who doesn't want to let go of his mommy. People chuckled awkwardly. I didn't. I was done being polite. I made sure my voice was loud enough for the whole room. "Victor seems very invested in getting rid of me," I said, my eyes fixed on him. "For someone who moved into my house and started making demands." Dead silence. Mom, of course, did nothing. Just rubbed her forehead like she had a headache. Victor's smile twitched, but he didn't say anything else. He knew I'd called him out in front of everyone, and he couldn't deny it. That night, I noticed some of my things were misplaced again. At first, just minor annoyances. A book turned upside down. A picture frame slightly askew. Then I realized what was missing. My favorite blanket, the one I'd rescued from the donation bin. Gone. I checked the house. Frantic. No sign of it. Victor was in the living room, watching TV, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Where's my blanket?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. He didn't even look up. "Don't know what you're talking about, Liam. Don't play dumb with me," I said, stepping closer. "You know exactly where it is." He finally looked up, his eyes cold and hard. "I'm tired of your attitude, Liam. You need to learn to respect me." "Respect?" I scoffed. "You haven't shown me an ounce of respect since you moved in here. You've been trying to erase me from this house, piece by piece." "That's ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "I'm just trying to make this a home for Sarah and me." At my expense, I said, my voice tight with anger. Mom, who had been listening from the hallway, finally stepped into the room. "Guys, please stop it." "No, Mom," I said, turning to her. "I'm done. I'm not going to be treated like this anymore. Victor wants me out? Fine. I'll leave. But I'm doing it on my terms." I turned back to Victor, my eyes burning with anger. "You think you've won? You think you've gotten rid of me? Think again. I'm leaving, but I'm not going to let you win." I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Victor control my life anymore. I spent the next few days plotting. It was all I could think about. I had to leave, but I wasn't going to let Victor think he'd driven me out. I needed to do this on my own terms, to take back control. I started looking at apartments online, secretly, carefully. I didn't want Victor to know what I was planning. I needed to find a place, sign a lease, and move out before he even suspected anything. I kept up the act at home, pretending to be indifferent to Victor's taunts. He'd make little comments about how nice it would be when I finally moved out, how much quieter the house would be. I just smiled and nodded, letting him think he was getting to me. Mom picked up on something was off. She asked me if something was wrong, if I was okay. I just told her I was respecting Victor's space, like he wanted. She looked guilty, but she didn't say anything. I talked to my grandparents, Dad's parents, about what was going on. They were furious. Grandma, especially, was livid. "That little weasel thinks he can push you out of your own home?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. "We'll see about that." She offered to help, to pay for a security deposit, to co-sign a lease. I hesitated at first, but then I realized I needed the help. I found an apartment, a small one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I signed the lease, got the keys, and set a move-in date, all without a word to Victor or Mom. I reveled in this. His face, when he finally realized he didn't have any idea. The perfect opportunity came when they planned a weekend trip to visit some of Victor's family. As soon as they left, I got to work. I called Noah, and he agreed to help me move. We packed up everything I owned, carefully and efficiently. Clothes, books, furniture, everything. It was like dismantling my life, piece by piece. By the next morning, my room was completely empty. No trace of me left. I felt a strange mix of sadness and exhilaration. I was leaving behind a lot of memories, both good and bad, but I was also taking back control of my life. Before I left, I sat down and wrote a note for Mom. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't live in a house where I was treated like a guest. I let her know I had a place of my own now, and that I'd keep in touch. But from now on, if she wanted to talk to me, she had to reach out first. I added a line to remind her that my side of the family would always be there for her. I blocked Victor's number before I even walked out the door. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his lies, his attempts to manipulate me. I left the note on the kitchen counter and locked the door behind me. I took one last look at the house where I'd grown up, the house where I'd shared so many memories with Dad. Then I turned and walked away. I was gone. The fallout started almost immediately. By the time Mom and Victor got back from their trip, I was long gone. The first call came that evening. Missed. Then another. Then a text. "Liam, where are you? Why didn't you tell me? We could have talked." I ignored it. I needed time to process everything, to settle into my new place, to create some distance. More messages followed. She wanted to meet. She wanted to understand. She said I should have come to her instead of just leaving. I finally answered. "I tried to talk, Mom." I texted back, over and over again. But every time you let Victor steamroll the conversation. You let him erase me from the house piece by piece. Silence. Then she texted, "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten." I didn't respond. What was the point? It was too late. A few days later, a new number texted me. Victor. He acted like this was all just a misunderstanding, that he never wanted me to leave, that he only wanted to blend the family. He said things had gotten tense, but it was never personal. He said he missed having me around. I almost laughed out loud. Was he serious? I texted back, "If you never wanted me to leave, why did you move my belongings to the garage? Why did you conveniently forget to include my name on family reservations? Why were you pushing rules on me like a landlord? Why did you throw out my things and pretend it was an accident?" The reply was instant. "You're being unfair, Liam. You're turning me into the villain." I blocked him. I wasn't going to waste my time arguing with him. He could play the victim all he wanted. A week later, Mom showed up at my apartment. She stood at the door for a second, looking exhausted, like she'd aged 10 years in the past few weeks. She didn't try to come in, just stood there like she wasn't sure what to say. Finally, she admitted it. "Victor went too far, Liam." "I let him." I should have stepped in sooner. I just nodded. I didn't say anything. What could I say? "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I told her I wasn't against having a relationship with her, but I wasn't going to pretend like none of this happened. If she wanted me in her life, she had to acknowledge how badly she had failed me. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, I think she actually understood. Victor tried one last time. He sent another message, this time from a different number, asking me to make peace for Mom's sake. He said I should talk to her, help fix things, be the bigger person. I blocked him again. It wasn't my problem. Word got out. Relatives started hearing about what happened, and most of them took my side. Some were shocked that Victor had acted this way. Others weren't surprised at all. A few relatives, mostly distant ones, tried to defend him. They said I should try to be understanding, that I should try to make things work. I ignored them. They didn't know the full story. They didn't see what I had gone through. Victor, of course, hated that people knew. He started acting bitter, complaining to anyone who would listen. He made little comments about how I'd brainwashed Mom, how he was just trying to build a family and I'd ruined it. He said I'd been waiting for an excuse to push him out. No one really bought it. Most people saw through his lies. They knew that he was the one who had created this mess. I stopped paying attention. Victor could spin whatever story he wanted. It didn't matter. I was done. I had my own space, my own life, and I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The house was still there. The house I'd left. But I'd walked away with something more important, my peace. And that was worth more than anything. Moving out didn't stop Victor. Even though I was gone, my name still came up in that house. He kept bringing me up, complaining to Mom, acting like I was some villain who had ruined his perfect vision of his home. It didn't matter that I wasn't even there anymore. He still found ways to make it about me. Mom, at first, let it slide. She tried to placate him, to smooth things over. But slowly, the cracks started appearing. The tension between them got worse. At first, it was small things, disagreements over chores, how the house was run, little arguments that ended with Victor huffing and Mom sighing. Then he started getting angry over things that had nothing to do with me. He wanted control over everything, what furniture went where, who they spent time with, what Mom was allowed to do with her own money. One of my cousins, who still kept in touch with Mom, mentioned that she wasn't looking happy anymore, that every time they saw her, she looked tired, like she was walking on eggshells in her own house. The final straw wasn't one big thing. It was the buildup, the constant pressure, the suffocating control. Mom started noticing it in small ways. Victor's complaints about me didn't stop even after I was gone. Then he started nitpicking everything else. Her spending, her friendships, even her work hours. It wasn't just about me. He had to control everything. And for the first time, Mom saw it clearly. She saw that Victor wasn't just a strong personality or a perfectionist. He was a controlling, manipulative person who needed to dominate everything around him. He complained to my aunts and uncles, saying I had abandoned my mom and turned people against him. He whined about how unfair it was that people took my side. He didn't realize something. The more he talked, the more people started seeing the pattern. It was never about me. He just liked to control things. And now that I was gone, he had lost his favorite target. I wasn't even keeping up with them, but one day, I got a text from my cousin. "Dude, I think your mom's thinking about leaving Victor." I blinked at my phone, surprised. Apparently, Mom had mentioned to a relative that she was reevaluating things. It wasn't an official decision yet, but it was clear she wasn't happy. Somehow, Victor found out that I knew before he did, and he lost it. I woke up to a nasty message from an unknown number. He went off about how I had ruined his marriage, how I had poisoned Mom's mind, how I was selfish and ungrateful. I blocked the number. I wasn't going to engage with him. A few weeks later, Mom reached out again. This time, it wasn't just a check-in. She admitted everything, that she had been blind, that she let Victor go too far, that she should have protected me instead of keeping the peace. She didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted to say it. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to process everything she said. But later, I texted her back. "If you want to rebuild our relationship," I wrote, "you have to show me. No more empty words. No more excuses." She agreed. Victor tried one last time. He sent another message, this time from a different number, asking me to make peace for Mom's sake. He said I should talk to her, help fix things, be the bigger person. I blocked him again. Not my problem. A year later, I got a call from my cousin. "It's official," he said. "She filed. The marriage is over." Victor didn't take it well. He played the victim to anyone who would listen. He said Mom had changed, that she was cruel and heartless. No one bought it. They knew he was the one to blame. I never gloated, never threw it in his face. I just enjoyed my peace. My grandparents told me they were proud of me for standing my ground, for refusing to let someone push me out of my own home. Victor wanted me to stay in my place. I did, just not in the way he expected. I had my own life, my own happiness, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. Victor, on the other hand, he was left with nothing. That was fine by me. Victor was finally out of Mom's life. The divorce was finalized, the paperwork signed, and everything settled. But I didn't hear it from her. I found out from my grandmother. She casually mentioned it over coffee one afternoon. "Oh, your mother's finally free of that man." That was it. No dramatic announcement, no grand speech from Mom. Just a quiet observation, as if a weight had finally been lifted. Victor, on the other hand, wasn't taking it so well. Almost immediately, he started running his mouth to extended family. He told anyone who would listen that I was the reason his marriage fell apart, that I had brainwashed Mom, turned her against him, and ruined their happiness. He spun a whole story about how he had tried to be a loving stepfather, but I had made it impossible. Of course, some distant relatives bought into it. A few sent me messages, asking why I hated Victor so much. One even suggested I should apologize and make things right. I ignored all of it. I didn't respond. I let him talk, let him spin his little narrative. Because the thing about people like Victor is they don't know when to stop. And the more he talked, the worse he made himself look. A few weeks later, Mom reached out. Not about Victor, not directly. Just small check-ins, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything. Then, one day, in a quiet moment, she finally admitted it. She should have stood up for me sooner. I didn't say much. I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but I appreciated the effort. But Victor, he wasn't done. One afternoon, he showed up at Mom's workplace. He didn't call ahead. He didn't ask to meet. He just showed up, stormed into the building, and started demanding that she fix things between them. Security had to be called. He was yelling, ranting, creating a scene. It was humiliating for Mom, and it was terrifying. That was the moment Mom finally realized Victor wasn't just controlling, he was unhinged. I didn't need revenge. Victor was doing all the work himself. His tantrums, his manipulations, his desperate attempts to cling onto whatever control he thought he had. It was all crumbling, and he was the one swinging the hammer. Then I heard something that made me laugh out loud. Victor was trying to date a family friend, one of my aunts. Apparently, he had started reaching out, testing the waters, trying to slip into another branch of the family tree. It was pathetic. My aunt shut him down immediately, not just a polite rejection. Full-on laughter, followed by a firm, "Yeah, that's never happening." Word spread fast. Victor was becoming a joke. That's when the cryptic Facebook posts started. Stuff about betrayal and fake families, drama quotes about people who pretend to love you but stab you in the back. He didn't name names, but everyone knew who he was talking about. It was embarrassing. Then my grandparents stepped in. They weren't about to let him rewrite history. They publicly called him out, setting the record straight. They pointed out that he had pushed me out of my own home, had disrespected my mother's family, and had only himself to blame for the mess he was in. It was brutal. But it was also necessary. Victor deleted the posts within hours. But instead of disappearing, he started reaching out privately, messaging people one by one, playing the victim, looking for sympathy. He wasn't getting it. Most of the family was firmly on my side. The ones who had bought into his sob story started distancing themselves. Even the relatives who had been on the fence finally saw the truth. Victor was grasping at straws. Then, out of nowhere, he emailed me directly. He wanted to talk. He wanted to clear the air. I didn't reply. I just left him on read. Victor had spent so much time trying to push me out of his life. And now he wasn't even in mine. Victor had officially lost everything. The house, the marriage, the family support, gone. But instead of quietly moving on, he did what people like him always do. He spiraled. And he made sure everyone knew it. At first, he kept up the act. He went around telling anyone who would listen that he was the real victim. That mom had been pressured into divorcing him. That I had brainwashed her. That he had tried to make things work, but I had ruined everything. Nobody was buying it. Extended family members started ignoring him. People he used to invite over for wine nights suddenly weren't returning his calls. Even the few distant relatives who had sided with him were now keeping their distance. He wasn't a misunderstood man who lost his wife. He was a walking disaster, and everyone saw it. Then he started posting online. Long, dramatic paragraphs about fake people and betrayal, cryptic messages about losing everything because of selfish people, quotes about karma and justice. It was embarrassing and pathetic. And then he started going after Mom directly. He made posts implying that she cheated on him, that she was a liar, that she had led him on, made him believe he had a future, and then threw him away. Mom wasn't even on social media, so she didn't see it at first. But other people did. Word spread. Someone showed her screenshots. She finally called me, not to defend herself, not to ask what to do, just to say, I can't believe I didn't see it sooner. With Mom ignoring him, Victor needed a new audience. And for some reason, he thought my aunt, Mom's sister, was the next best option. He tried flirting with her, sending casual messages, liking her old posts, bringing up how crazy everything had been and how some people had turned against him. My aunt, who had never liked him to begin with, laughed loudly. Then she told the entire family. Now Victor wasn't just an ex-husband. He was a joke. The silence from Mom must have been driving him insane. Because one night, he tried a new angle. He called her in the middle of the night, claimed he was struggling, said he needed help. He played it up. How hard things had been. How he was barely getting by. How he just needed one conversation to make things right. For a second, Mom almost fell for it. She felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of sympathy, but then she stopped herself. She saw through his lies. She knew he was just trying to manipulate her, to reel her back in. And she hung up. She called me the next day, told me about it, and I told her exactly what was happening. He wasn't struggling, he was desperate. He didn't want help, he wanted control. And if she wasn't careful, he'd sink his claws right back in. When Mom didn't fall for it, Victor went for the next best thing, sympathy. He started reaching out to my younger cousins, telling them he was being treated unfairly, that Mom was cold and heartless, that I had turned her against him. They laughed, then they told me everything. That's when the biggest lie dropped. Victor started telling people that I had ruined his career. He claimed that, because of me, he had lost job opportunities, that I had spread rumors about him, damaged his reputation, and left him with nothing. I hadn't spoken to him in months. How could I have ruined his career? It was absurd. So I looked into it. Turns out he had quit his job when he married Mom. He thought he could live off her money forever. And now that he was on his own, he had nothing to fall back on. That was his mistake, not mine. That was it for Mom. She finally blocked his phone, his email, everything. No more second chances. No more pity. He was done. And then came the last message. A long, furious email, full of rage, full of accusations, full of "you destroyed my life." He blamed me for everything. For Mom leaving, for the family turning against him, for his career falling apart, for the fact that he had nothing. It ended with one final dramatic line. "I hope you're happy. You got exactly what you wanted." I replied with one sentence. "I just stayed in my place, like you told me to." Then I blocked him. For good. Victor finally disappeared. No more angry emails. No more cryptic Facebook posts. No more attempts to twist the narrative. After months of throwing tantrums and trying to manipulate everyone around him, he must have realized that nobody was falling for it anymore. And just like that, he was gone. Vanished. With Victor out of the picture, Mom finally started putting in the effort to fix things. She reached out more, not with guilt trips or excuses, just genuine conversations. She started showing up, asking how I was doing, actually listening instead of just trying to smooth things over. It wasn't instant. She knew she had messed up. She knew that rebuilding trust wasn't going to happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, she was trying. Meanwhile, I had moved on. New apartment, new routines, no more walking on eggshells, no more passive-aggressive comments, no more feeling like an outsider in my own home. I was focused on my career, enjoying my independence, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next problem to appear. Victor had once made me feel like I had no place. Now, I had built one for myself. My grandparents had been in my corner from the start. They watched everything unfold, never wavering in their support. When it was all over, my grandmother just nodded and said, "Took long enough." The few relatives who had sided with Victor, they faded away. No big confrontations, no dramatic arguments. They just stopped reaching out, which was fine. If they had believed Victor's version of events, they weren't people I needed in my life anyway. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Victor was struggling financially. He had quit his job when he married Mom, assuming he could live off her income forever. Now, no alimony, no financial security, and apparently no real friends left. He had burned every bridge he had. One day, Mom admitted it. She had been blind. She should have seen it sooner. She should have defended me instead of trying to keep the peace. She should have realized that Victor wasn't just a strong personality, but a controlling, manipulative person who was trying to push me out. She said she was sorry, and I believed her. I wasn't going to pretend none of it happened. I wasn't going to erase the years of tension, stress, and fights. But I was open to moving forward. Not for her, not for the past, but for myself. Victor never reached out again. The last time I heard about him was through a random mutual acquaintance who mentioned he had moved away to start fresh. I didn't ask for details. I didn't care. He was out of my life for good. In the end, Victor got exactly what he wanted. He wanted me gone. He wanted me to stay in my place. And I did, just not in the way he expected. I was happy. I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I was completely at peace. A year had passed since Victor's meltdown and disappearance. Life had never been better. I had fully moved on. New apartment, great job, solid friendships, no stress, no drama, no Victor. Even my relationship with Mom had improved. She was more present, more aware. She didn't try to rewrite history or pretend everything was fine. She owned up to her mistakes, and little by little we rebuilt what Victor had tried to destroy. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Then, out of nowhere, his name popped up again. I was at a cousin's get-together when someone casually mentioned, "Oh yeah, Victor's still bitter. He still rants about you sometimes." I almost laughed. A whole year later, and he was still talking about me? I didn't ask for details, but later that night, curiosity got the best of me. I pulled up a burner account and checked his profile, and there it was. Post after post of vague, passive, aggressive nonsense about fake family members and people who destroy marriages. Nothing direct, nothing with my name on it, but it was obvious. Even after all this time, he was still playing the victim. Then I found out the real kicker. Victor had tried to live off alimony, except there was barely any. Mom had made sure of that. He had assumed he could keep up his same lifestyle, fancy dinners, going to clubs, weekend getaways, but reality hit hard. Now he was working a job he used to mock. The same kind of job he once sneered at, calling it beneath him. The irony was too perfect. And it wasn't just his finances that had crumbled. Most of his old friends had distanced themselves. Turns out, people get tired of hearing the same sob story over and over. At some point, even the most sympathetic friends realized that maybe, just maybe, you're the problem. He had pushed people away, just like he tried to push me out. Now he was alone. Then I heard the best part. Victor was living in a smaller apartment now. Not destitute, but far from the comfortable life he had expected. The lavish lifestyle he had planned for himself had slipped through his fingers. And now he was just another person working to make ends meet. And the worst part for him? No one cared. He wanted to be the king of the house. Now, he didn't even have one. Meanwhile, Mom had moved on. She had started dating again, but this time she was much more cautious. No rushing into things. No letting someone dictate her relationships. I wasn't involved in her dating life. I didn't need to be, but I supported her. I wanted her to be happy, just not with someone like Victor ever again. Then, out of nowhere, he tried one last time. A carefully worded email. Not an apology, exactly, but a plea wrapped in guilt-tripping. I just wish that things could have been different. I never wanted it to be like this. Maybe we can find a way to make things right. After all, we're family. It was classic Victor, playing the victim, never taking responsibility. I left him on read. It was a fake apology, tones claiming he never meant for things to get this bad, that he just wanted peace, that he hoped one day we could move past everything. I didn't even bother replying. He didn't want peace, he wanted control, and I wasn't giving him any. A week later, he made one last bitter post. Some people will do anything to turn a mother against her husband. I actually laughed. It wasn't anger anymore, just amusement. He had no one to blame but himself. A few days later, Mom saw the post and just rolled her eyes. "He never learns," she said, shaking her head. That was the last time we ever spoke about him. I blocked him from everything, email, social media, every possible way he could ever reach me. Not out of anger, not out of spite, just because he didn't matter anymore. Victor wanted me gone. Now I was thriving and he was struggling, alone and miserable. I didn't need revenge. Victor had already destroyed himself. One evening, Mom came over to my apartment. We ordered pizza, watched a movie, and just talked. About life, about work, about everything. As she was leaving, she turned to me and said, "Thank you, Liam." "For what?" I asked. "For standing up to him," she said, her voice soft. "For not letting him control you. For showing me that I deserved better." I smiled. "You're welcome, Mom." And then, for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of complete and utter peace. The shadow of Victor had finally lifted, and the future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibilities. That's where the story ends. With healing, with hope, and with the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is simply living a good life.